Hello! I've got a bonus video today, a project that I've been meaning to do for a very long time. In fact, since last year when Let's Resin sent me a whole bunch of resin products, and I decided that it would be a great idea to try making a chess set. Well, when that turned up, I realised that it was just going to be a whole lot harder than I had anticipated, so I kind of stuck it into the too hard pile with the idea that I was going to deal with it later. Well, that kind of slipped my mind, and I received a very lovely email from the Let's Resin rep asking if I'd released the video yet, and I went, oh my god. I haven't done anything. I felt so bad because I'd agreed to do this and I didn't end up doing it. I'm a professional! So I put everything else aside and I put this as priority number one. But honestly guys, I was terrified about this because when it comes to resin, I wouldn't call myself an expert by any means, and a chess set does require an advanced level of knowledge with resin. You can see where this is probably going. And yes, I had a few disasters filming this video, but in the end I actually managed to make an entire set, as you've probably seen a little preview of it in the thumbnail. So let me show you all that happened while I was making this. It took me a solid week to do this because there was a lot of waiting for epoxy resin to cure, but I got there in the end, and I'll show you the finished result at the end of this video. I was so nervous about this one, but I'm gonna have to do it, so let's get into it! Starting off with the molds. It came with the chessboard and one lot of chess pieces which fill up one side of the board, and you have to pour them twice basically to get them for both sides. It also came with a checkers mold, and I completely forgot about that, so I'll just be dealing with the chess pieces and the board today. And the molds are made of silicone. I set it all up so I could see what I was working with here, but this resin had an expiry date and I was right on it. Oh dear. So now was definitely the time to get using it. Inside the box was a big pile of plastic measuring cups, a couple of pump attachments to put on the resin bottles themselves, which I'll show you soon, some different coloured dyes to mix into the resin, and of course there's far more stuff here than I can use in one project. But what had really caught my eye are these mica powders. I thought those would be good to mix into the resin. And then we come to the resin itself. And they sent me 2 enormous bottles of it, 2 litres each, or half a gallon. Being epoxy, it comes in part A and part B, so there was 4 litres or a whole gallon in total, and these 2 parts get mixed together in a 1-to-1 ratio. Which honestly makes life easier because there's no calculating. There were some other shiny bits in there which I could add into the resin, and a whole bunch of disposable gloves and some larger ones that I wasn't quite sure what they were at the moment. There's also some ocean white that I didn't end up using, and I think I've got about 3 bottles of that stuff now. I really should make some ocean scenes with resin. And left in the box are a bunch of popsicle sticks for mixing and some more cups and gloves along with the instructions, but of course I won't be needing that. Anyway, I decided I wanted to go with gold and red for this project. Those 2 colours were standing out to me, watermelon red to be exact. But there are lots of pretty colours in here, and I will have to use these mica powders for a future project. These were really excellent, and I'm so glad I went for the mica powder. I will also have to try out some of these dyes at a future time, but let's just stick with the gold and the red for this project. Although I was tempted by that blue as well. Here's everything set up, and I'd put everything on silicone mats which I'd bought off Amazon. I'll link them in the description. They were a godsend by the end of this. And 1 clean wooden board. I also set up a little table to put the resin while it was curing overnight. And here's one of the measuring cups. It has metric and imperial on here. Normally I'd go metric, but actually the imperial measurements were easier to see because 4 and 8 is half and half of the resin, and it was just so much easier to pour on this side. There were too many numbers on the metric side, So I guess I'm going American today, and the most important part is wearing protective equipment in the form of a P2 mask that blocks out fumes because that stuff's toxic. Also make sure you've got a door or window open as well. Now, I was wondering what this large bag was. I thought these were huge gloves, but no, it actually turned out to be something far more practical. An apron! I didn't even think of putting an apron on, so I'm really glad they provided this in the box. Once resin gets on things, it never comes off. And that includes skin, I know from experience, so gloves are also mandatory, and I figured I'd use their disposable gloves that they'd provided. Any kind of glove, a latex glove or washing up gloves would be fine too. Ideally disposable ones because they're going to get chucked in the bin after this. I went through 3 or 4 pairs in this project, and don't I look the height of fashion? But safety first, my friends, and now it's time to get pouring. But I realised I had B before A, so I thought I'd better change those around before I made a mistake in the future. Having them in the right order is always a good help. Now I'm just going to say here that the pumps I put in were more trouble than they were worth. It took forever to get the thing activated so that the resin would pump out. And resin A was very thick because it's getting colder here and resin tends to thicken up in the cold. I hadn't thought of that, had I? But eventually I got it to go, and I discovered very quickly that it was going to take ages to pump this resin out. You could see how slow it's coming out of the nozzle, and it was so frustrating. Oh my gosh, I hated this part of it. I ended up taking the nozzles out of the bottles and just pouring directly from the bottle itself. That was so much easier, but I persevered with this pump for a little while, and I eventually poured out enough resin, but not before I broke the pump on resin B, so that one's stuffed anyway. The pumps had to come out whether I liked it or not. I haven't even started and I'm breaking things. I did my best to pour out 2 equal measurements, 4 ounces each of resin A and resin B to make 8 ounces in total, which is about 236 ml. I spent about 5 minutes mixing the resin. If you do not mix the resin enough, it will not set, and that is just the worst thing ever. And no matter how long you let it sit, it will never cure. I've learned this the hard way. I poured some not properly mixed resin into a mold once. It wouldn't set, and I had to throw the whole lot, including the mold, away. So mix it, and then mix it some more just to be on the safe side. Once it was thoroughly combined, it was time to add in the mica powder. Now I like to mix the resin first before adding anything else, just so I know that the resin is actually properly mixed. But then you get to do a second mix, which is always good, just in case you need a bit more time, adding in the mica or the dye, and this takes probably just as long to stir it all in as well. I added in 2 spoonfuls and I got a really strong colour. Normally I don't add enough, but this time I decided to go for broke and actually use enough powder. Now I tried to pour it directly from the cup and I could see immediately that that was going to be a bad idea, so I've poured some of it into one of these smaller cups that has a little pourer, and this made it a lot easier to decant a smaller amount of resin into the mold. I was struggling to film this first part of the pour, and so it's not the best footage. But what I've learned from pouring chess pieces in particular is you need to squeeze the base of the mold to try and remove any air bubbles. If you just try to pour the resin in without doing that, there will almost always be air bubbles at the base of the mold which do not come out on their own. And what I wasn't actually filming on camera properly here was me squishing the mold a few times to try and push air bubbles out. Now it took me quite a while to get the hang of this, and I have some much better footage later in the video when I poured the second set of chess pieces because I had figured it out a lot more by then and I knew what I was doing. This time around I was really struggling, the camera's not in focus, it was just a bit of a struggle if I'm perfectly honest with you, but I eventually got all of the pieces poured. And here's what they look like, all standing on their heads on the wooden board. And I really wish I'd covered that board with a silicone mat, and luckily all of my spills were on silicone over here, but disaster struck because I stupidly picked up the whole board and moved all of the pieces. 3 of them tipped over, pouring resin onto the wooden board, and I panicked here. I had to stop filming and fix all of this up, so I re-poured the molds that had tipped over, cleaned up my camp table, and the rest of that resin is just going to have to dry on the board like that. That was a pretty big disaster, and I was sorely regretting doing this, and I still had to pour resin into half of the squares of the board. This had to be done immediately. I couldn't leave it because resin will sit, and eventually I got it all done. I even had a bit of resin left over, and I poured that into a rose mold. And as for all this mess on the side, I left it right where it was so it could cure overnight, because there's no way I was touching that sticky resin to try and clean it up. It's much easier to let it all dry. And I had a few spillages in the chessboard itself. I had to leave those too. I was so completely over it at the moment, I just decided to walk out of my studio and leave it for the day. But thankfully everything's set rock solid, and so I had done enough mixing along with getting the ratio of the resins correct. And now the fun part, peeling everything off the silicone. At the end of this project, I just chucked out all of these cups and sticks that I'd got resin on. There's no saving them. It's so satisfying peeling dried resin off silicone like this though. But those silicone mats paid for themselves, and they're not that expensive. Plus they usually come in a set of 3, so there's plenty to use there. I have 2 lots now, so 6 mats in my studio. I very gently picked off dried resin using a palette knife so that I could clean up all of the blank squares here for my next pour. But moving over to this board, and this resin had set solid, there's no peeling it off MDF though, so I just left it on there, and I figured I would use this board for the rest of the project. I might even do something with it after that, or it might just go in the bin. Anyway, it's time to pop all of these chess pieces, and this took forever. It's really hard to get the chess pieces out. Those silicone molds were very tightly on there, and they do stretch, but I was just scared I was going to break them or something, or bend the silicone out of place so that my next lot would be completely misshapen. But eventually I got there. Oh, it hurt my fingers so much to do this. But I do have to say that I'm quite pleased with the first lot of chess pieces that I poured. They're not perfect. I did end up with a few air bubbles in some of them. That's more due to lack of experience than anything else. The chess pieces are the hardest part of the whole thing to do with the resin, and you can see there are just a few little flaws there. But most of the pawn pieces here were pretty good. It was one of the rooks, I think, which I didn't quite get the castle bit right at the top, and one of the pawns lost its head because I think there must have been an air bubble inside it, but I was able to kind of push it together and it just ended up setting all the way because these were still a little bit soft when I popped them. This resin took a full day to cure, but it was still a little bit malleable, and so it needed a second day to properly harden up. So I was able to push bits around in the meantime before they completely set. The knights are so hard to get off, especially because of their snouts here. But with a bit of jiggery pokey I got them out, and they look really great. I'm so happy with these. One of the rooks is missing a castle crenellation at the top, but otherwise they turned out really well, and I do love the pearlescent red colour. Now it's on to the gold. And I have to do this all again. But I remembered something else that was included in the set, and that's these 2 velvet bags so that you could store the chess pieces. I think that is fantastic, and I'm probably going to store all of the pieces in one bag so that I can make a second chess set if I want and have a second bag for those chess pieces. But let's see if I can get through this one first. I was feeling much more confident today, and I have a better footage as well. I poured 4 ounces of resin A, and now I'm pouring 4 ounces of resin B over the top. Resin B is thinner than A, and so there will be a definite line that you can see a bit later on. As you can see, it's so much easier just to pour straight from the bottle, and I was taking great care not to tip the bottle too much. I was just letting a small amount of resin pour out at a time so I could really control the flow of it. And it is absolutely crucial that you get 1:1 ratio. Some resins are 2:1, but it needs to be what they say, because otherwise it won't set either. It's a very fickle medium. It needs to be poured exactly right, and it also needs to be mixed for ages too. I very carefully lifted the cup up so you can see the line between A and B right there, and now these 2 need to be thoroughly combined. And I find the best way to do that is to kind of lift the stick up and down rather than just stirring it in a circle, because this really does bring the stuff from the bottom up to the top and vice versa. And as you're mixing, you'll be able to see it combining together. See how there's streaks of it? That means it's not mixed enough, and what you want is for the resin to be completely clear like it is here. And don't worry about those air bubbles, they will come out on their own. I would recommend hand mixing for about 5 minutes. There are machines which will do this much quicker, but I just mix by hand because I don't have one. And now it's time to add the gold mica powder. I went in with the same amount, 2 spoonfuls here, or roughly about the same. I find you do need to be quite generous with the mica, otherwise it will just look too transparent within the resin. Of course, it's easier to say these things when I was sent them for free. I mean, resin stuff isn't exactly cheap, but how satisfying is it watching the mica mix into the resin? I enjoyed this part of it very much, and of course this took ages to do as well, because it stays up the top and trying to get it to the bottom of the cup is quite a challenge. You can see it there, but just keep going and eventually it will look like this. If I've learned anything from resin, it's to take your time and don't rush it. It takes as long as it takes to stir it, and it's not going to set right away, so there is plenty of time to pour it. But you want to pour everything within about an hour or so, because it does start to thicken up, as my resin did, because this was a difficult project. By the end of it, it was pouring like thick toffee, but at this point it was still very runny. I was trying so hard to be a bit neater this time around, but resin is a very messy thing, so be prepared for that. Now here's better footage of me squeezing the base of the chess piece, so that then I can pour in a little bit of resin. Don't pour it all the way to the top, just about halfway. Then you basically let go of the bottom, and all the resin will suck down into it. How cool is that? After numerous attempts, I finally mastered this little thing. I'm so happy about that. And the other thing to do is squeeze the resin up and down a few times, and you'll see the air bubbles coming out, because no matter how hard I tried, I always managed to trap at least 1 or 2 bubbles in the base of the mold. If you do this with only a small amount of resin in it, then it won't spill out. And once all the air bubbles are out, you can pretty much fill up the rest of it and not worry about any other air bubbles, because the top half of it is generally not going to contain as many or any bubbles. And don't overfill the chess pieces. I did that a few times too. I'll just speed up the process but show you a couple of others so you can learn this technique as well if you decide you want to pour a chess set. In particular with the knights, you need to squeeze their noses, otherwise you will lose all of it. The first piece I ever made was a total disaster. But with this bubble squeezing out technique, the crisis was averted and I was able to fill up all of the molds nicely, making sure that the resin was in every single nook and cranny. Admittedly, I did miss a few on some of the molds, but not enough to be super noticeable. It is satisfying watching the bubbles coming out. If you're new to resin, I would really recommend trying out some easier molds first, like a simple shape, a square or a pyramid, or something flat like a coaster. There are so many amazing molds out there and lots of video tutorials. I find the best thing to do though is to just get pouring with the resin and make those mistakes yourself, because that's just the best way I've learned. I moved the pieces over one at a time and didn't spill any, but I've still got that board to pour, so let's get going with this. I had heaps of resin left over for this one because I hadn't actually spilt any. Now I'm just going to pour the other squares, trying to stay within those lines and not pour into the border part of it. The biggest tip here is do not pour too much resin into those squares because they will overflow. I found it easier to pour in a circle of it and then use one of those sticks to push it out to the corners of the square. Now what I found impossible is between the squares are tiny little borders in the mold which you're supposed to leave free and not have any resin going onto them. But I found that no matter how hard I tried, the resin just kept overflowing. So what I ended up doing was just pushing the gold resin directly up to the red resin, and it actually worked out well in the end. It's maybe not the most perfectly poured board, but I did my best with it. And I think if I was to pour a second board, I would try to add less resin into each of those squares. But we live and learn, and I just kept going with this. I was just hoping that something would turn out. because what we're looking at now is actually the underside or the base of the board, and then the top of it is against the mold, so I'm not going to be able to see what it's looking like until I actually unmold it. Now you can see what I mean, that the gold has kind of overflowed everywhere into the red. I was really hoping it wasn't going to look like that when I unmolded it. I still had some resin left over because I hadn't spilt that onto the table, and I added it into that rose mold where I'd poured the red resin. That had only filled up halfway, so I'm just going to add the rest of the gold resin and fill it right up. I still had more than what would actually fit into this mold, so I ended up pulling out a second rose mold and just pouring the rest of the gold into that. It didn't quite fill it all the way, but I think I got about 3/4 of the way up, which was fine. It just meant I wasn't wasting the resin and I could make something else with it. These rose molds are actually really easy ones to pour. They're on the Let's Resin website and I'll try to remember to link them. I'll link everything by Let's Resin and then you can find them for yourself. They keep releasing new molds and there's some really cool ones on there. And now to leave everything to sit overnight for 24 hours, and I was sending out resin curing vibes here, because if it didn't cure, the whole lot would be ruined. But thankfully it did. It was set hard the next day, and I have one more pour to do, which is the rest of the border and the base of the board. My initial thought was to pour it in black, but I decided that was just too much of a risk, so I found some matching sparkly bits in the set that they'd sent me. But before I get to that, here are the two roses that I poured, the red and the gold. This one turned out okay, although I wouldn't mind putting some gold on the tip of the red, but the base of this just looks so cool. I love how there's texture in the gold. It's just really interesting, and I think that's because gold is a heavier pigment. And the pure gold rose is fabulous. I love this so much, even though there's a couple of air bubbles embedded in there permanently. But it just turned out so pretty, and I love that gold mica powder. I want more of it. But back to pouring the base, I mixed up another cup of resin, 4 and 4 once again, and I shook in some of that shiny plastic, just to add a few sparklies within the resin rather than it being plain with nothing else in it. Although clear resin on its own really does look good. The gold was an entire piece of foil here, so I had to rip it up by hand, and that was kind of annoying. I ended up using all of the pink. I just chucked the whole pot of it in, and then I stirred it up, so there are lots of sparkly bits floating about in that resin. And now to pour it. I was so scared of this. I was thinking, please don't ruin this on the last pour. But it actually worked out really well. I've sped this up, but I took it very slowly, making sure that all of the board was covered, especially around the border. And I'm glad I added in the sparkly bits because I had a few flaws on the checks themselves. I think there was a cat hair on at least one of them that had gotten stuck in there. So by adding the sparklies, it kind of broke it up a bit, and then you can't see any bits of fluff or other marks that I'd left in the board. It's so hard to do this without getting dust and cat hair into it. This was 8 ounces of resin, and it wasn't quite enough to fill it. So I ended up mixing another half a cup, which is 2 ounces of resin each, or 4 total ounces. So the entire rest of the board, not counting the red and gold squares, is 12 ounces of resin, just in case you're curious to know how much you need. I was purely guessing here, but I actually guessed correctly, and this is just plain clear resin, which mixed in with the sparkly resin, so there wasn't any issues there. And yes, I'm still wearing the mask because there are a lot of stench fumes coming off this resin. It's not a very nice smell, and it's not good for you, so please don't breathe it in. And avoid having children or pets in the area when the resin is wet. Once it's dry and cured, it becomes non-toxic and safe enough for people to be around. But now it's time to pop out all the gold chess pieces because they've cured for long enough, and these ones just worked out so much better than the red ones because I left them longer, and that gold is fabulous. They're lovely and slippery. I really like the feeling of dried resin. It's so satisfying. And look, no air bubbles at all. here they all are after I popped them out. One bishop had a flaw without that tiny little bit on the top. I was really liking the two lots of colours together, and they look really great. I was so happy with them at this point. But the scariest part was unmoulding this board. I was so nervous it wasn't going to work. It's set properly though, and look at that. It's almost perfect. I am so thrilled with this. Although you probably need to wear sunglasses because it's so bright. Despite the challenges on the way, I am so proud of how this board turned out with all of those chess pieces. This was a massive project. It's definitely the hardest thing I've ever done in resin, or in many other things, but I'm really glad I've finally done it. I've learned so much from this experience, and now I can say I've poured a resin chess set. And the only thing left to do is remember how to play chess. Here she is in all her glory. I'm so proud of this. There may be a few flaws in here, but honestly, it's a playable set, and I think it's turned out really, really well. It is a bit bright, but it wouldn't be me if it wasn't bright. I absolutely love the gold resin. That's turned out so pretty, and despite all of the stress of making this, it was actually pretty fun, and I have learned so much. I feel like I've leveled up about 10 levels doing this particular project when it comes to resin making. It makes everything else look quite easy, so I'm not sure when my next resin video will be, but I feel like I can do a bit more. I've got a bit more confidence now, and yes, I may even make another chess set, although I don't think I'm going to be filming that one because it was so stressful. But otherwise, it was a complete success in the end, despite the fact that I have wooden boards now with resin all over them that is never coming off. At least it didn't go on the floor or my desk. That would have been an epic fail. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and thank you to Let's Resin for supplying me with all of the products, and my apologies for it being so late, but I hope it was worth it in the end. So do go check out Let's Resin. Their website's really great, and they also have products on Amazon, so they're pretty easy to find. And overall, everything I've used by Let's Resin has been excellent quality, including the resin, which is always lovely and clear, and most of the bubbles come out on their own without needing to do anything else to them. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up, and you might want to click subscribe for more future videos. I've got all sorts of stuff coming up, and I've got a couple of other resin videos that I've done in the past which you can watch. I will see you all again really soon in my next video. Have a great day out there. Swatchy later. Bye.